I'm sure you're already aware that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world and one of the fastest growing in the UK too, with specifically young men being drawn to the religion. Now, I'll go out on a limb here and say I believe Islam already is the biggest religion in the world and the most powerful in the UK. Now, I know Christianity is still the biggest religion nominally, but in practical terms, it's really not. After all, how many people who state they're Christians actually live by Christian values, adhere to Christian culture, go to church, for instance? The number of people who do that across the world, and especially the Western world, is tiny. I say this as a Christian myself. If you go to a church, it's either African congregations on the one side or old ladies praying for their deceased husband on the other. To be honest, I don't blame people for not going to the church these days. On one side, it's gone completely woke, and on the other side, it's far too literalistic. It's not talking about the big themes of history, life, death, rebirth, meaning. If it said that, it might appeal to more young men. So this begs the question, why are people, especially young men, drawn to Islam in increasing numbers? And is there anything we can learn from this to buttress our own tradition for the coming chaos in the future? Well, I think the obvious place to start is it offers young men especially something alternative and different. We hear a lot from the liberal mainstream that Islam is othered in Western culture, but I believe a lot of adherents to Islam want to be the other to Western culture. What I mean is it gives young men a sense of radical orientation in a chaotic world. On the one side, it's rebellious to Western culture, but it also gives very firm guidelines of how you live your life, which has a stabilizing factor. Henceforth, it allows lots of adherents who've struggled to get on in life to judge Western culture from what they view as a morally superior position while still being rebellious to the mainstream. This also explains the woke to Islam pipeline. Woke culture defines Christian culture as evil and colonialist, and many young people view Islam as a world religion which is separate from all of that. But of course, that's historically inconsistent. The Arab Muslims took over many African countries. They also had a slave trade that was bigger than the transatlantic one. They even chopped the knackers off the slaves in that. But this isn't about historical consistency. This is about the here and now. The Muslim world hasn't been hoodwinked into self-hating and guilt by woke culture like the West has. Henceforth, it has a confidence and aggressiveness and arrogance as self-belief that we've completely lost in the Western world. A key dimension of that is that Islam hasn't lost faith in masculinity and its own tradition. This is so important because it offers adherents certainty. That's what a lot of young men who are confused really seek. Now, while I obviously believe that Christian culture provides a much better blueprint for manhood, the West has completely trampled on that. The best thing a Western man can now be is some ally to a girl boss in the local office. None of that aids a young man in figuring out who he is, what his role is in life, how to deal with his biological urges, how to place himself spiritually in the context of the world. That's exactly why we've got a crisis of masculinity in the West. One of the qualities of healthily established masculinity is that it carries a noble authority, a competence, and a strength in service of good. That was at one time one of the aims of Christian culture for men. However, I sense in Islam that there is a wielding of power, but it's used sometimes in more of an aggressive sense. This leads us to the contradictions of our modern society. While Islam is increasingly militant and aggressive, it's as if the liberal left establishment want us to believe that Islam is an innocent, sweet, victim, bunny religion that would never do anything to anybody. Only bigots would think that. Now, partly this is because of leftist brainwashing to believe that anything that's non-Western is innately good, and any criticism of anything non-Western makes someone a Nazi immediately. Yet the other part of me feels that leftists with Islam is like a middle-aged small lady with an aggressive big dog. In one sense, they think it's a good little sweetie pie, but they know deep down that they don't want to get on the wrong side of it and are very careful when they go near it. Personally, I believe that many Muslims pick up on this subliminally. They know they have a power over Western society and they can wield it when they want change. Further to that, they can play up to the idea from the liberals that they're oh so terrible victims. But like any victim, if you take on that mindset, eventually you'll become aggressive and lash out. I mean, what other religion in the UK can get away with sending a teacher into hiding for 3 years and counting for showing a picture of their prophet? What other religion can draw in the mother of an autistic boy, who's only 14 by the way, who dropped and scuffed a Quran, to come in to apologise to them all so they don't set themselves on him? An even more egregious example here is the grooming gang scandal, where the police, the media and the government didn't want to act on it because they were frightened of being called racist and dealing with the backlash. Same with the Manchester bombing. A security guard saw the actual bomber and thought he was acting strangely but didn't want to report it because he was afraid of being called racist. Would he do that if it was a Buddhist? This also works the other way around. When you get woke, annoying LGBTQ types, they always try and kiss in front of Christians as if it's some act of rebellion. I mean, come on, if you do that in front of them on an Anglican church, they'll talk about making you bishop of the local diocese, not shut the door on you. But why don't they do this outside of a mosque if it's such an important issue? Well, we know why. It's because they'd be at severe risk of physical violence and they'd see it as harming a noble and good tradition. So in essence, I think that lots of Muslims know they have power in the modern Western world and the modern UK, where it's essentially now the de facto state religion. That's why after the riots, Keir Starmer is desperate to tell Muslims how he intends to make them feel safe, but doesn't mention anything to the English public after children have been murdered about their safety. But what bugs me about all of this is, while I get that Islam can provide young men especially a sense of meaning and orientation in the world, I can sympathise with that, but it's how they're so happy to use woke culture and woke politics to their advantage and then make out that they stand against it. What I mean by this is Islam presents itself as a solution to the modern Western debauchery and nihilism and materialism and so forth. However, they're more than happy to be one of the phobias when it suits them. Everything's Islamophobic these days. It's exactly the same model as homophobia or whatever phobia is trendy today. However, that could start to backfire on Islam in time. Look what woke culture's done to the Western world. Now the poison is in Islam too. It could rip that apart as well. Secondly, if you watch the channel regularly, you'll know I'm a big fan of underlying mythoses that inform a culture and a civilization. Let's be honest, what has Islam truly provided? Yes, it has provided a civilization, but not exactly a modern technologically advanced one. The advances we see in Islam now are essentially because they struck oil. It's not really built on the back of anything. But in essence, I think the main thing we can learn from all of this is we need to redevelop our own tradition and strength too. We need to stand firm in our values, firm in our traditions. By all means, be loving, peaceful, healthy. However, with that, we must be strong and firm. Don't want trouble with anybody, but if they bring it, we can answer. These are just some of my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.